My mother set her wine glass down so carefully, so deliberately, that the soft click against the table felt louder than anything she could have shouted. We made a decision, Renee. The money goes to your sister. She has a real future to build. I felt my fork stop moving. I didn't put it down, it just stopped, frozen somewhere between the plate and my mouth, suspended in a moment I wasn't ready for. I looked around the table. My aunt was studying her napkin. My uncle suddenly found the wall very interesting. My father kept cutting his steak, eyes down, jaw tight. Nobody said a word. Then my father, still not looking at me, added, "You'll understand when you're older. I'm 34." I sat there and smiled. I nodded slowly. I picked up my fork and finished my meal. And the whole time, one thought was running quietly through my head, calm and steady like a river that already knows where it's going. What they didn't know was that I already had a number, one number on a piece of paper I had kept in a shoebox for 2 years, and that number was about to change everything they thought they knew about me. My name is Renee Calloway. I'm 34 years old, and I have spent most of my adult life being the daughter nobody worried about, which sounds like a compliment until you realize what it actually means. I work as a project coordinator at a mid-sized nonprofit that helps low-income families access legal aid. I'm good at my job. My colleagues respect me. My supervisor has told me twice that the organization wouldn't run as smoothly without me. But when I go home for the holidays, none of that comes up. Nobody asks about my work. Nobody asks about my goals. There's always something more exciting to talk about. And that something is usually my younger sister, Danielle. Danielle is in law school. Danielle is sharp and loud and magnetic in a way that fills every room she walks into. Danielle has plans, and she announces them, and our parents lean forward every single time like she's reading them the most fascinating story they've ever heard. I used to try to contribute to those conversations. I stopped a long time ago. Our grandfather, my mother's father, set up trust funds for both of us when we were young girls. I never asked about mine. I never needed to. I trusted that it was there, that it was mine, that it was the one thing in this family that had been split equally down the middle. That trust fund wasn't just money to me. It was proof that someone in this family had looked at both of us and decided we were worth the same. I wasn't flashy. I didn't announce my moves, but I had been quietly building something they never thought to ask about. And the night my mother clicked that wine glass down on the table, all of it was about to come to light. If you grew up being the steady one, the responsible one, the one who never caused drama and still somehow ended up with less, I want you to know I see you. Have you ever played by every rule, done everything right, and still got passed over? Subscribe to this channel because this community is for you. Drop your story in the comments. You are not invisible here. And if this already feels familiar, click that like button so we can keep going. 3 days after that dinner, I called my parents and asked for a formal meeting. I kept my voice even. I told them I wanted to understand the decision, hear it explained properly, review any documentation involved. My mother sounded almost relieved, like she had been expecting me to be dramatic and was grateful I wasn't. The meeting was at our family attorney's office, a man named Robert Hale, who had handled my grandfather's estate and various family legal matters for over 2 decades. I arrived on time. My parents were already there, and so was Danielle, which nobody had mentioned to me. She was sitting in the chair closest to the window, dressed like she was attending a signing ceremony, not a family meeting. My mother slid a document across the table without much preamble. It was a signed amendment to my grandfather's original trust, redirecting my portion of the fund to Danielle. The stated reason, printed clearly in formal legal language, was that Danielle's legal career required capital investment. I read it twice. I kept my face neutral. Then Danielle laughed lightly and said, "I mean, come on, Renee. You work at a nonprofit. What were you going to do with it? Save whales?" I looked up. I waited for someone to respond to that. My mother looked at the table. My uncle suddenly found the wall very interesting. My father kept cutting his steak, eyes down, jaw tight. Nobody said a word. Then my father, still not looking at me, added, "You'll understand when you're older. I'm 34. I sat there and smiled. I nodded slowly. I picked up my fork and finished my meal. And the whole time, one thought was running quietly through my head, calm and steady like a river that already knows where it's going. What they didn't know was that I already had a number, one number on a piece of paper I had kept in a shoebox for 2 years, and that number was about to change everything they thought they knew about me. I found out about the private meetings through my cousin Yvette. She called me about 2 weeks after the attorney meeting, nervous and talking fast, saying she wasn't sure if she should tell me, but she couldn't stay quiet anymore. She said the family had met privately with Robert Hale at least twice over the past year to discuss restructuring the trust. My name was mentioned. I was not invited. I was not contacted. I was not consulted. I called my mother the same afternoon. "We didn't want to stress you out," she said, her voice smooth and certain. "You're sensitive about these things. We thought it would be easier this way." Sensitive. I wrote that word down on a notepad and circled it. Then I set the notepad aside and kept moving. The second thing happened at my Aunt Carol's birthday brunch, a big, noisy gathering at her house with aunts and uncles and cousins crowded around folding tables covered in good food. My father was in a warm, generous mood. He made a small speech about family, about legacy, about where the Calloway name was headed. He said Danielle was the one carrying the family's future forward. He said she was building something that would make everyone proud. Then he looked at me with a gentle, pitying smile and said I was still finding my path. Still finding my path. At 34, in front of everyone. I smiled back at him. A warm, easy smile. I picked up my glass of orange juice and took a sip and said absolutely nothing. Later, in my car, I gripped the steering wheel and breathed. Then I drove home and opened my laptop. The third thing was Danielle's social media. She started posting about our grandfather constantly. Old photos, quotes she attributed to him, long captions about his wisdom and his love and what he had meant to her. Every post was carefully worded to paint her as the grandchild who truly carried on his values. Her followers responded warmly. Family members shared the posts. I read every single one. My grandfather and I used to sit together at his kitchen table on Saturday mornings. He smelled like cedar and strong coffee. He taught me how to read a balance sheet when I was 12 years old. He explained compound interest with sugar cubes and a cup of tea. He used to look at me over his glasses and say, "You're the one with the quiet fire, Renee. Don't let them rush you." Danielle barely visited him in his last 2 years. But I said nothing publicly. I just kept getting clearer. Every insult, every exclusion, every pitying smile made the noise quieter and my thinking sharper. I started pulling out every piece of paper my grandfather had ever given me. I reread old letters. I went through a folder he had left me after he passed, full of financial statements and handwritten notes. Every time they thought they were winning, I was getting clearer. Here is what you need to understand about my grandfather. He did not do anything carelessly, not one thing. He was the kind of man who planned for outcomes years before other people saw the problems coming. He was deliberate and quiet and deeply intelligent, and he loved me in a way that was practical and specific, not just warm. He paid attention to who I was, not who he wished I would be. 2 years before he died, he pulled me aside after Sunday dinner. The rest of the family was in the living room. He pressed a sealed envelope into my hand. It was thick, slightly worn at the edges, like he had held it many times before deciding to give it to me. He looked me in the eye and said, "Open this when the noise gets too loud." I had kept it in a shoebox on the top shelf of my closet. I respected his instruction. I waited. After Danielle's posts, after the brunch, after my mother's voice on the phone telling me I was too sensitive, after 8 months of a secret that had been kept from me while everyone smiled on Sunday dinners, the noise was loud enough. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single index card with two things written on it in my grandfather's careful handwriting: a name, Gerald Finch, and a phone number with a Chicago area code. What they didn't know was that my grandfather had two lawyers. The family knew one, I knew the other. I called the number that same evening, sitting on the edge of my bed with the index card in my hand. It rang 3 times. A calm, measured voice answered. "Gerald Finch speaking." I told him who I was.
There was a brief pause, and then he said, "Renee, I've been expecting your call. Your grandfather told me you'd know when it was time." Gerald Finch had been a private estate attorney for over 30 years. He had worked with my grandfather quietly, separately from the family's legal affairs, for more than a decade. They had been old friends before they were attorney and client. And my grandfather, who did not do anything by accident, had spent years building something with Gerald's help that no one in my family knew existed. Gerald explained it to me over 2 phone calls, methodically and without drama. My grandfather had established a second private trust in 1999, separate from the family trust entirely, funded through real estate holdings and a brokerage account he had built quietly over decades. It had been growing untouched for 25 years. It was structured under a private legal instrument that contained no parental reallocation clause, no amendment provisions, and no family oversight of any kind. It was in my name alone and had been since the day it was created. The family trust, the one my parents had just handed to Danielle, was the smaller piece. It had always been the smaller piece. Gerald told me that my grandfather had anticipated the possibility that the family might do exactly what they had done. He had structured the private trust to be completely protected from that kind of interference. He had also left a personal letter inside the trust documents, addressed to me. I asked Gerald what I should do next. He said, "Nothing yet. Let the 60-day window close. Let Danielle's transfer finalize. Let them settle into the certainty that they have won. What comes next will mean more once they believe the story is already finished." So I waited. I went to work every day. I answered group texts with friendly one-word responses. I sat through a Sunday dinner where Danielle talked about her plans with the trust money, and my parents nodded proudly, and nobody asked me a single question about my life. I smiled and passed the bread and said very little. Danielle started shopping. She mentioned the money to her friends. She started referring to herself as someone who was coming into a financial position soon. My parents relaxed into a kind of easy, satisfied arrogance, the particular confidence of people who believe they have already handled something and can stop thinking about it. I watched all of it. I said nothing. And then Gerald called and told me the transfer had finalized. He said it was time.
The family attorney's office had the particular stillness of a room where important things happen on a regular basis. Robert Hale's office smelled like old wood and fresh paper, and the air conditioning ran slightly too cold. My parents arrived first. Danielle came in after them, dressed in a cream blouse I had not seen before, and my mother reached out and squeezed her hand as she sat down. My father sat straight in his chair, relaxed and certain. This was a formality to them, a celebration almost. They had invited me to sign a non-contest acknowledgement, which felt, I think, like a final small gesture of control, one last document for Renee to process quietly. Then I walked in with Gerald Finch. Robert Hale looked up from his desk, and the color in his face changed immediately. He recognized Gerald. He knew exactly what it meant that Gerald Finch was in his office. Gerald set a legal portfolio on the table with the steady confidence of someone who had done this many times before. He introduced himself briefly and then began to explain. My grandfather had established a separate private trust in 1999. It had been privately managed and completely independent of the family estate. It had been growing for 25 years. It was structured to be irrevocable and untouchable by any parental clause or family amendment. It was in my name and my name only. The room was very quiet. I looked at my sister. I watched the understanding move across her face slowly, like something coming into focus. I said, "You gave away what you thought was my future. You didn't know I already had one. Grandpa made sure of that." Danielle's voice was unsteady when she finally spoke. "That's not— He never said anything about—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Gerald confirmed what I had said. He placed my grandfather's personal letter on the table and noted that it named me specifically as the grandchild who, and I will tell you this part exactly as it was written, understood the value of patience and silence. My father straightened in his chair and started to speak, something about family, about discussing this together, about what my grandfather would have wanted. I stopped him. "There's nothing to discuss," I said. "This is already done, just like your decision was already done 8 months ago." I thanked Gerald. I picked up my copy of the documents, and I walked out of that office, through the carpeted hallway, through the glass front door, and into the open air. Behind me, my family sat in a lawyer's office with nothing left to negotiate. I did not pop champagne. I did not call anyone. I drove to a small lake about 40 minutes outside the city, the one my grandfather used to take me to when I was young, and I sat on a bench with his letter in my hands and I read it twice. Then I cried. Not from anger or triumph. I cried because my grandfather had looked at me clearly and completely, had known exactly who I was and who I would become, and had quietly protected me years before I even needed protection. He was gone, and I would never be able to thank him. That grief had nothing to do with money. I took the weekend alone. I came back with my head clear. In the months that followed, I resigned from my coordinator position and used the private trust to establish my own nonprofit consulting firm, the exact thing I had always wanted to do and never had the capital to attempt. I took on small organizations first, helping them build operational structures and sustainable funding models. It grew faster than I expected. It turned out there was a significant market for exactly the skills my family had always called practical and unimpressive. My mother reached out first, a careful, warmly worded text asking if we could talk. Then a group message from the family, light and casual as if nothing particular had happened. Then my father called directly, his voice carrying that particular mixture of authority and uncertainty that I recognized as his version of an olive branch. I responded to all of them, politely, warmly, without urgency. Danielle kept her trust fund. I never contested it. It genuinely did not feel like a loss. She had received what our parents chose to give her, and what my grandfather had chosen to give me was something else entirely. Those were two separate things, and I was at peace with both. What I carried with me from all of it was this. They gave away what they thought was everything I had. They looked at me and saw someone manageable, someone who would accept a decision made in a room she was never invited into, someone who would smile and nod and move on quietly. But my grandfather knew something they never bothered to learn. I never needed their approval to be worth something. I just needed time. If your family ever redirected money, inheritance, or opportunity away from you and towards someone they liked more, then you know exactly how that silence at the dinner table feels. That specific, airless moment when you realize a decision has been made and you were never part of it. If that's your story, I want to hear it. Subscribe and drop your experience in the comments. Were you the one they passed over? Tell me, I am reading every single one. And click hype to help this story reach others who need to know that what is genuinely meant for you cannot be taken, no matter how many documents get signed without you in the room. Watching a family choose against you is one of the quietest, most private kinds of pain there is. It's hard to explain to people who haven't felt it, that specific loneliness of being overlooked by the people who were supposed to know you best. If any part of this story stayed with you, subscribe and become part of this community, because your story deserves to be heard here too. Tell me where you're watching from. I genuinely love seeing how far these stories travel. And click hype to let this one find the people who need it most. Thank you for being here.